G'day and welcome to Not the Farmer's Wife podcast. I'm CJ Steedman and I'm not the farmer's wife, I'm the farmer. I'm also a mum to MJ and OJ and a full-time off-farm worker. And like most farmers, I'm able to farm with the help of my family and my partner, who I call the handy helper. On Mojo Homestead, we grow chickens, goats, cows and bees, and we do it using regenerative agriculture and holistic management practices. If, like me, you love all things farming and homesteading, then we'd love to have you along for the ride. So let's get farming. G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Not the Farmer's Wife. CJ on her own here today. The handy helper is actually asleep at the moment. He's on night shift. For all those shift workers out there, thank you for doing what you do. I did it for 20 something years and I do not miss the night shifts at all. That is the one thing that it's really nice to get your rhythm back into a flow. Episode number 106 today, and we are discussing happy, healthy hens. Now, it's one of the things that I get a lot of people approach me online and say they'd love to keep hens, they'd love to keep backyard chickens, they'd love to have chickens on their small farm. And one of the big things that seems to really kind of hold everybody back is I won't know what to do when they're sick, and I'm not sure that I can manage it when they're sick. So it seems to be a real roadblock for some people. And that's great in the sense that these people are taking it seriously. They're taking chicken ownership very seriously. They're not going into it in a light-hearted fashion. They're not going in and going, well, I'll just get them and whatever happens, happens, you know. So I'm kind of really pleased that people are treating it with that kind of same seriousness as, say, getting a dog or a cat. I really don't want people getting chickens if they're not prepared to deal with the medical issues that may come with owning chickens. There's not a lot, and they are, I wouldn't say rare, but they don't happen as often as what they could happen. That being said, I don't want people to go into it lightly, because when a medical emergency happens with a chicken, it can be pretty catastrophic. I nearly said catastrophic. You have to be prepared for the worst. And I joke, we've just had Bill and Ben leave the farm to go to their forever home as pets, which I don't normally sell goats as pets, and we did in this case. And I did say to the new owners, I wrote out a cheat sheet and everything for them to follow. And I said, goats have unusual and interesting ways of finding to kill themselves. Chickens can be a bit the same. Just when you think everything's travelling along smoothly, something can flare up. So to me, prevention is obviously better than the cure. That's the case for kids, animals, yourself, everything. But I can't stress that enough in this case. Prevention really is better than the cure. But you still need to be prepared for what to do in the event you have to do the cure. So there's only a few things that can impact them, but we'll go through them. That being said, this is not a complete guide, and I want to give the disclaimer at the beginning. I am not a vet. I am not a vet nurse. I'm just somebody who keeps chickens and has done for a number of years, and I am very well versed in the different ways that chickens can hurt themselves and make themselves sick. So let's go through a few. First thing you need to know is how to spot a sick hen. And that might seem really obvious, but chickens being an omnivore and being a predator of sorts, they are a predator over other animals like mice and rats and bugs and things like that. They are a flock animal. And I don't know whether this is the case with all flock birds, but chickens don't like to let everybody else in the flock know if they're sick. They have a self-preservation mechanism where they just go, I'm not going to show that I'm sick because I don't want the rest of the flock knowing. This sounds really, for some people who've not had animals, this would sound really bad, but animals can be incredibly cruel and hurtful to a sick animal in a flock. So if there is a sick animal, we're not talking about, like, you see there's memes with packs of wolves where the sick animals travel in the middle of the pack and there's an alpha male at the front and an alpha male at the back, or the alpha male is at the back and there's other beta males at the front leading the flock, the herd, what do you call a group of wolves? I don't know. But they're leading them, and the sick ones are in the middle. The mums with babies are in the middle, and everybody's protecting the rest. Well, with chickens, it doesn't quite work like that. With chickens, if there is a sick one, they get ostracised, they will get picked on. I have seen chickens look like they're pretty much about to kill each other because one is sick and not as effective. And I think it's a self-preservation for the whole flock that kicks in, where they go, if we have a sick one, that sick one could potentially drag the rest of us down and make us susceptible to predators. I know when I was a scuba diver, when I lived over in Papua New Guinea and I was scuba diving all the time, we actually saw a hammerhead shark come in to the beach area that we were scuba diving off. Now, hammerhead sharks are school sharks. They don't travel on their own. And correct me if I'm wrong, if there's somebody out there who knows more about sharks than me. But the instructor that I was with on the day, he said to me that hammerhead sharks will bring themselves away from the school and take themselves off somewhere to die when they get to that point. They know they're dying. They don't want to drag the rest of the school down with them. So they just wander off on their own and go and die somewhere. With chickens, what I've seen is that they will basically push out a chicken that looks like she's failing. If her health is failing, they'll push her out rather than drag the rest of the flock down with them. Sounds terrible, but that's nature. And it's really important to understand that that's just part of their natural instinct. They have to protect the entire flock. And if that means getting rid of a sick bird, that's what they do. So there's a few things you can keep an eye out for, but one of them will definitely be being segregated and away from the rest of the flock, where the rest of the flock will, and they've got bird friends that are their friends that they kind of hang out with at the water cooler and, the feedlot, and they share an egg nesting box with. But if they're being segregated and pushed away from other members of the flock, there's a good chance there may be something wrong. But what to look for in a healthy hen. So a healthy hen should have clear, beautiful, bright eyes. No conjunctivitis, no weepiness, nothing in their eyes. Their eyes should look nice and clear. There should be no cloudiness or anything like that. Their feathers should look well groomed, as in all the feathers going in the one direction. If there's feathers kind of sticking out all over the place, chances are it means they're over grooming or they're doing something grooming. They're not getting the grooming right. So that's a good thing to look out for. And their feathers shouldn't look gunky. They shouldn't look like they've got extra shit on them. That's probably the nicest way of putting it. They should be very active and responsive, so they should be running around the hen house. That's not to say that they don't lie down and have a little bit of a rest, particularly when I see them in their dust baths. Sometimes I think, oh, fuck, are they dead? Because they'll lay on the side in the dust bath and just not move. But normally active and running around. Consistently egg laying. Egg laying is a good sign of chicken health. If you, up until they get to the older ages, a young chicken should be laying consistently. And that may not be every day. It might be every second day, but it should be consistently every second day. If they're not laying, if they're not getting old, there could be a problem. And you may not be able to tell which one isn't laying. So we have a trail cam that we sometimes use in the chicken house. If we've used it in the past when we've had chickens that have been eating their own eggs, and you can set up the trail cam. It's wireless. It just records video anytime there's movement. So you sometimes have to sift through a lot of video in order to get to the part you want to see. But set up a video cam and you can kind of see which chickens are going in and which ones aren't. If all your chickens look identical, put a dollop of colour on the back. And if it's a black and white cam, just put a dot in different spots on different chickens so you know which one isn't laying or not coming into the nesting box. A red, vibrant comb and wattles. So their wattles and their comb and all that kind of, it feels like skin all around their face. That should be red. It should be vibrant. Sometimes with their comb, it should be standing up. Not all the time. Some of mine walk around with a kind of sappy comb, but it should be it shouldn't be fallen over and completely collapsed. And it should have some good colour to it and some good texture to it. It shouldn't look dehydrated. It should look quite healthy. Eating and drinking normally. If you've got one that's sitting off from the rest and not coming in if you go in, and the best way to do this is one of those rare times I would suggest using scratch milk mix. If you go in with scratch mix and throw a bit of corn on the ground, if you've got one that's not well, she won't come near the food. She'll avoid. And the other thing is normal droppings. And again, this can be hard to tell which one's sick. So if you notice that you've got abnormal droppings, like really runny or wormy or liquidy, like diarrhea droppings, then you may have to go around and check the vent area of each of them. You will notice pretty quickly when you have a good look at the vent If they've had diarrhea any time in the last couple of days, there'll be some diarrhea around the feathers. They won't be cleaning. And because if they're sick too, they're probably not cleaning themselves as much. So you'll notice there'll be a little bit of diarrhea around the feathers there. So that can be a good indicator. Now, red flags, I've already covered some of them, but lethargic, sitting around with fluffed up feathers. It's really funny. Chickens, when they're not feeling well, they'll fluff all their feathers up. And I don't know whether it's an effort to try and keep warm or try and cool down, but they don't, they're not in their normal state. They're just looking like they're really uncomfortable. Pale bluish combs or wattles. So if their wattles or their comb are not red and not looking vibrant, if they've got any kind of discoloration to them, then that's a really good indication that maybe there's something wrong. Difficulty breathing. Chickens get respiratory issues. It's one of the things that they do get. And avian flu is an example of that. But there's other respiratory issues that they get. They just get normal pneumonias like any other animal with lungs. So having a check around their nose area, so where the top of their beak is, they'll have 2 nostrils. Also, their eyes can sometimes get a bit conjunctivitis-y when they have a respiratory issue. So you want to check and see if they're wheezing, gurgling, if there's any kind of excess snot hanging around there. Loss of appetite, which you may notice if they're not going to the feed thing, but also too can be a little bit of weight loss. So if suddenly a chicken's got a bit skinny, probably worth investigating. Limping or trouble standing. The other thing, apart from respiratory, the other thing that chickens can have issues with will be their feet. They can sometimes get a thing called bumblefoot. And I'm not going to go through all of the illnesses that chickens can get today. These are just the main ones, just the main things to watch out for. But if you see a chicken limping, it's probably worth segregating that chicken and having a good look at their feet and seeing what's going on. Watery or discoloured droppings I've got on my list, which yellow, green or bloody. Bloody is bad. Bloody is probably coccidiosis, which most chickens develop an immunity to. But if they haven't been medicated, they can sometimes not develop that immunity to it. So watery or discoloured droppings that don't look like normal chicken poo is generally going to be a really good indicator for you. And you, like I say, go around, check the vents and see which one seems to have the most problems. Feather loss, and that this is outside of a normal molt period. So during the molting period, chickens look terrible. They lose their feathers. They look a little bit skinny to me. They always do, even if they're well wormed. They just look run down. And that's because they are. That's because during the molting period, that's their like regeneration period. So outside of the molting period, if you notice feather loss, particularly around the vent area, around the back end, that's a sign that you need to go and do some closer inspection because that can indicate a few things. Any kind of bad smell around the vent, or I've got one girl who she always smells bad when she tries to go clucky. She sits in the nesting box, and when they go clucky, they sit and they don't get up and move, and they don't go and poo outside. They hang on to it, and she can get a real odour about her. And as soon as she decides she's not clucky anymore, which usually takes about a week, the smell goes away. But if they're egg bound, if they have any problems with pooing, you will smell. You can get there's a real chicken poo smell about them. So that's a really good indicator. Now, what I find is the best time to really be paying attention to this kind of stuff is when you're going up of an afternoon to collect eggs. I go in, I top up feed, I check water, I collect eggs, and then I will go out and stand with our girls. They're out in a free range area. I'll go out and stand with them and have a look. And I've just noticed just the other day that one of our roosters has lost some feathers around his tail end area. So his vent has lost some feathers. And that's usually an indicator of external parasites. So I knew that my girls were probably getting close to maybe needing a dust for lice again. And that's a really good indicator for me that we're probably at that point. So go out and have a look, see how they're interacting with each other, see if anybody's being segregated. We have an Isa Brown who has lost some vision in one eye, and I don't know what it's from. She's just got cloudiness in that eye, which is usually a sign of a loss of vision. And I've noticed that she walks kind of one-sided when she's trying to see things. But she's not being segregated. She's quite happy and healthy other than that. And it could have been an injury that I wasn't aware of. Another chicken could have pecked her and damaged the eye. She could have some internal eye issue. Their Isa Browns, they're not heritage breed. They're not particularly valuable chickens to me. So long as she is functioning and eating and pooping and laying eggs still, I'm letting her go with that eye damage and loss of vision. Like I say, she hasn't lost weight. She's still eating fine. Nobody's segregating her. But she does come in and eat as soon as I top up the feeder. She comes in and eats first. And I don't know whether the other chickens are actually letting her do that because they know that she's got this issue with her eye. But it's a good time to go around and check your chickens and see if they're all right. Now, parasites. Parasites are going to be the thing that causes the most grief in any livestock that you have. And parasite control is just such a tricky topic. The people that took Bill and Ben the other day, we were talking about it. She's a long-term horse rider and horse owner. And we were talking about the overuse of wormers in livestock. And it's a really hard balance. I've lost goats to Barber's poleworm, which is just, it's horrible. Barber's poleworm, it makes them anemic. It sucks the blood from the inside out, and you lose stock to it. I know in our area where we live here, there are a lot of farmers that have sheep, and the sheep farmers, it's their biggest nightmare is Barber's poleworm because it gets in, and we're in the right climate for it to just really flourish, and those particular parasites will kill a sheep. So parasites are a real pain in the ass, but we have to find a fine line between overworming and developing worm resistance and parasite resistance to our medications that we're giving, and keeping the animals free of the parasites, because the parasites will kill the animal. So it's this horrible balancing act of not overworming and not treating without good reason and still keeping your animals happy and healthy. So for chickens, mites, lice, and worms are your three big ones. Excuse me, just have a sip of water. And there's a couple of really good ways. With your mites and lice, and there's different ones, I'm not going to go into all the details, there's different ones in different areas depending on where you live. You need to do some research in your own particular area. But the things to watch your chickens for are feather loss, like I said, our big rooster who's lost a few feathers around his tail end. I think it might be time, especially around the vent and the neck, because that's where they get itchy and they'll pluck at their feathers and pull the feathers out, and they don't grow back because the mites are impacting the skin and impacting the feather growth. So it becomes an itching and overpreening measure. So when they're pulling their own feathers out, that's usually overpreening, and overpreening happens because they're itchy, because they're uncomfortable. Pale comb and wattles. When they've got blood-sucking lice and mites on their body, that will reduce their blood that's in circulation, so they will get anemic. And that's the same for goats, cows, chickens, everybody. If they have too many mites on the outside of their body, they can become anemic. So that's a really good thing to watch for. Now, how can you prevent it? Keeping your coop clean and dry. Moisture is not great, but also too, what I've noticed is that we have an increase during our storm season. So during and I could be completely wrong here, but I've definitely noticed an increase. So during our heavy storm season in Australia, it's the summer months, we get afternoon storms. When we have lightning and high pressure and low pressure drops, it seems like all of the eggs hatch all at once. And I don't know whether that's something to do. Somebody told me that fleas are more prevalent after a thunderstorm, and I feel like mites are the same. So a wet, damp area is not good. You want dry area. If it's during that thunderstorm season kind of thing, you just have to be a bit more careful. Check dust bathing areas. Make sure you've got a dust bathing area. Now, our girls, because they're out in the field, they make their own dust bathing area, but sometimes I'll go up and throw some Damascus earth or some ash into the hole that they've dug, because there's so many of them, they'll all go to the one spot once somebody's made their dust bathing area. And Damascus earth is a really good assistance. It's not going to cure it. It's any of these natural cures. They're never cures. They're never going to fix it 100%, but you can assist and help. And Damascus earth is one of those ones that when they coat themselves in it, it seems to clog up the mites' back ends or something. They can't breathe. They don't live as well. They can't move as quickly. And so it just slows them down and slows their reproduction down. And ash, I think ash has the same effect. So when we clean out our wood fireplace over the winter months, we generally will take our ash up and put it in a hollow in the ground in the chicken run. Check roosts and cracks for signs of mites. Now, I always know when we have a mite issue. As soon as I go to collect eggs, I'm really sensitive to mites on my skin. As soon as I go to collect eggs, if I reach in and grab an egg, I can feel them on my skin. It's such a horrible feeling. And you may not even have a major mite problem if you notice one on an egg or we're in the nesting boxes, because that's where the girls sit. That's where mites are going to drop off. So I'm just super, super sensitive to it. And sometimes I have gone, oh my God, we've got mites, we've got mites. And then I go look at the girls, and the girls aren't actually that bad with them. But because I'm super sensitive to it, I kind of pick up on it straight away. As soon as I feel one, I know that they're there. You don't have to over treat mites, but if you are noticing that there is a lot around, or that there's a lot in the nesting boxes, that you really need to go and check your girls then. Anywhere in your coop area, you can sterilise. You can wash it out, use some disinfectant, and give it a really good clean. There's lime whitewashing that you can use, that they used to use in the olden days for inside of coops, and I've used that. I've tried that we had a terrible situation with our fixed coop before we went to a mobile coop, and we used to get a lot of lice in, a lot of mites in there, and I whitewashed it with lime, and it did work. It did cut it right down. And then your next step is your sprays or poultry dust. Now we use, I want to say Pesdazone. It's a white powder, and all we do is tip the birds upside down. So their wings, they go to sleep a bit. I've talked about before, holding them by their feet. If you hold them upside down, their head, the blood rushes to their head, and then they kind of go dopey in a bit of sleep. And also too, their wings will generally spread out. So we will dust under the wings, we will dust along the belly and around the vent area, and then put a strip of dust down the back of them as well when we sit them back up again. Now that powder, I also use it for my goats for mites. It can be used, it is food safe, so it can be used on animals that are being used for food production. With meat birds, you generally wouldn't have to use it because they're only going to be 8 weeks old. And if you've got a mite problem at 8 weeks old, there's probably some other issues that need dealing with. But with your egg layers, don't stress about egg production. I always, because we don't wash our eggs when we collect them, we like to keep the bloom on them. But I wash my eggs before I crack them open. If there's anything on there, if the shell doesn't look perfect, I will wash them before I crack them into anything, just so that we don't have any crud landing in our food. And I think that's a safer way to go. I think people relying on the fact that an egg's been washed and there's nothing on the outside of it is probably, no, it's not a chance I want to take. I'd rather wash it right before I use it and leave the bloom on it up until then so that it stays for longer. But even for goats, putting the I want to say Prestazone, I will put it in the show notes what it is. I sprinkle that on the chickens. I sprinkle that on the goats, my milking goats, and that is completely safe. There are other things you can use that are sprays. Now, with the chickens, I've never used the liquid spray, but with the goats, it's Cooper S, I want to say, and you spray it on them and it gets rid of the mites. My understanding of mites is that mites are not cross species generally. So a chicken mite won't go to a goat and a goat mite won't go to a chicken. However, if you've got a mite problem with one, you probably want to check the other to make sure that they're not got a mite problem as well. But there are sprays you can get as well, the chicken sprays. I think they're a bit stronger, a bit more chemically, but depends how bad your problem is. If you've got a really bad mite infestation that's come in with birds that you bought from outside or something like that, you may need to go to that stronger level. Check the back of the spray bottle or the container to see if there is a withholding period for eggs. With the white powder that I use, there is no withholding period, so you can eat the eggs and not have to worry about it. So that's mites and lice. Worms. Now, I've got to be honest, I gave away a chicken one day to a family who had lost a chicken and they only had one chicken. I said, you can't have one chicken. I gave them a chicken. And they came back to me and said, oh my God, the chicken was really wormy. And I was like, God, how girls, I didn't think they were wormy. Anyway, I don't think they were wormy. I think they had a little bit of diarrhea, probably from being taken out of their normal environment and transported to a new environment, and they were a bit nervous and their system wasn't quite set yet. But you will see worms in poo when they poo. If you go and check just random, and you don't need to make sure which bird it is, because if one bird's got it, all of them are probably going to have it. So go and check in your coop area, and if you see poo that has worms in it, they've got worms, they need treating. Now, other things you can look for is weight loss, even if they've got a normal appetite. So a bird that's eating normally but seems to be losing a little bit of weight, If they have the runny or the bloody droppings, that can be an indicator. And poor egg production can also be another indicator because their body's, not functioning as well as it should be. Now, as far as the finding worms in the poop, I've got to be honest, I have never found worms in our chicken poop. I have seen them lose a little bit of weight. The main symptom we've seen is they lose a little bit of weight and a little bit of condition. So they'll lose some feathers, the egg production drops off. And at that point, if I know that I haven't wormed in weeks, months, usually it's about every 4 months I look at doing it, I will worm them. Now, there's a couple of ways to go. You can use natural wormers to see how that works. And I've only just recently had a conversation with a woman online about pumpkin seeds. I had no idea. Pumpkin seeds evidently are great wormers for not just chickens, but other animals as well. So there are some, and certainly pumpkin seeds with garlic. Garlic is supposed to be a very good cleansing agent for chickens. So that could be a natural one that you try. And I would probably use that more as a preventative rather than a cure. So I would say feeding them pumpkin seeds and garlic before you notice any kind of issues. If you notice issues, if you're already at the point where you notice issues, that's when I think you need to step up to that more chemical-based wormer, more conventional wormer. So making sure that they are rotated off the area that they're on if they're a bit wormy is another one. And I've talked about it before as far as pasture rotation, and pasture rotation works for every livestock animal. You don't want them eating where they shit all the time. So the reason that we have our mobile chicken coop that we move around is that they're not on their own shit. We move them once a week and they're on fresh pasture. So any kind of parasite load that was building up gets a chance to have a break in the cycle. And when I was talking to Bill and Ben's new owners about it, we were talking about rotational grazing for horses and how important it is for any kind of parasite load for any livestock to move the animal regularly so that they get a break from eating over their own shit, basically. It's the best way, and it's one way that we can stop our reliance on wormers and stop having these worm-resistant, medicine-resistant worms developing. So move your chickens if you can, rotate in the pasture, use your natural wormers as a preemptive rather than a cure-all, and keeping feed and water containers clean. Chickens are filthy. Sometimes they will shit their own food. They'll shit their own water. We've got 7 baby chicks out in the brooder house at the moment, and they climb up on top of their feeder and then shit in their food. I'm constantly cleaning it out. They're just, anyway. It's something that you can do. Now, I think I did talk about, I'm just checking, I'll talk later on about conventional treatments further down because there are different kinds of worming things that you can do. The next thing I wanted to talk about was treatment versus culling, and it's the topic that most people freak out the most about. Nobody wants to kill their chickens unless they're killing them for meat production, in which case, have at it, go to town, fill that freezer. But when do you call it? So it's a tough call, and you have to, and I really want new chicken owners to decide this before they get chickens. Decide what is going to be the cutoff point for, we will pay for a vet, we will pay to get this animal fixed, or we're not going to pay for a vet. Now for us, it's our valuable livestock. We'll get a vet. Everything else I'll try and treat myself. And at a certain point, and we had this happen only last week, we had a chick born with spraddle or splayed legs, and we treated her, I was calling her, but it could have been a him, for 4 days we treated. And the handy helper and I had that. We have these hard conversations regularly, so we know exactly what to expect. We'd already had the hard conversation probably day one and said, at what point are we going to pull the pin on treatment? At what point are we going to say, we've done everything we can, we're not going to, it sounds terrible, but waste any more time treating an animal that may never get better? At what point? So we did some research about splayed leg. We'd never had a chick with splayed leg before. It was the first one for us. So we did 4 days of treatment. We did some research about how long it normally takes for them to come good. And we said on the 4th day, if the chick has not come good by the 4th day, then we will terminate the chick so that we are not wasting time chasing and flogging a dead horse, essentially. And by day 4, the chick had not come good. In fact, I felt like the chick was actually getting worse, and so did the handy helper. And so the handy helper simply dislocated its neck. It was done and dusted within about 5 seconds. And that's a hard conversation to have, but I think every livestock owner needs to have that conversation. At what point are you going to pull the pin and say, we're not flogging a dead horse anymore and we will terminate? Or are we going to pull out all stops and do everything we can? So have that conversation. Whoever your significant other is that's helping you, if you're doing it on your own, man, more power to you. But then have that sit down, have a cup of coffee and write down under what scenarios would you keep trying, and under what scenarios will you say, no, we're done. So for us, the things that we do treat are the minor injuries, cuts, peck wounds, things like that, no problem. We've got spray that we use. We use the purple spray on everything, everything. Even my kids have sometimes had purple spray put on them. So if you've got kids that cut themselves, make a bit of purple spray on them. They'll be fine. It's good, antiseptic. External parasites, obviously, we treat ourselves. That's a no-brainer for us. That's an easy one. Parasites are always going to affect animals, so you need to be prepared to treat that. Mild respiratory issues. I didn't mention it before, but anytime you have a bird that you think might be sick, the best thing you do is segregate it from the other chickens. And that's because whatever they've got could be contagious. And if it's contagious, you don't want everybody coming down with it. So mild respiratory issues, we will bring them into the brooder house, which we have 2 sides set up to the brooder house, so we can segregate them over to one side and keep them away from any chicks that may be in there. But I probably wouldn't put them near chicks if I thought they had a contagious issue. But I'll keep them in, feed them, try and clear the nostril area to see if it comes good and clean. Usually a little bit of salt water will get rid of any gunk out of there. Sometimes if they've got a treat like a medical cut or anything like that, I'll bring them into the brooder house and treat them with spray. If you're using that and they come good, fantastic. As soon as they look like they're healthy enough again, back out in with the rest of the flock. With mites, I treat everybody in one go. So if one has mites, I make the assumption that everybody has them and everybody gets treated in one go. And we also rotate them to fresh pasture when we treat for mites. So we will move them to fresh pasture, treat them for mites, and then they get a quicker move. So we do a quick change around move. So it might only be 3 days and then they'll move again. And that's because my hope is that any dead mites that have fallen off them are going to be in that particular area of pasture. And by moving them 3 days later, the mites that have died, or any eggs that have dropped off won't have had a chance to hatch and redevelop. So I've moved them to fresh pasture, and I'm hoping that all the mites are off them, or most of the mites are off them, including the eggs, and then they get a fresh start and fresh grass. But if you keep them separate for any kind of injury or anything like that, it also gives you an opportunity to specifically target that bird for electrolytes or any medication that you need to give them. And putting electrolytes and vitamin stuff in water is not a bad thing. I'm actually looking at developing a natural cure-all, like a booster, a vitamin booster for chickens that I can sell and also use for our chickens. When to cull? This is the hard question. And for everybody, this line in the sand will be different. So for us, we are trying to run it pretty much as a commercial enterprise. So we have to make some hard calls that maybe other people who have got more time or very invested in their particular birds may not want to make. But for us, culling comes under these things: severe or untreatable respiratory issues. Obviously, avian flu is a horrible thing, but there are other things as well, pneumonias and stuff like that. Now, if I've segregated a bird and I've treated her for a couple of days and she is not getting better, she's getting worse, I will not allow a bird to suffer. So she will get dispatched. Internal egg binding that doesn't resolve. We've only had this once. We had a white bird. She looked like an Australorp, but she was a hand-me-down. We'd had her for a few years. She was a hand-me-down when we came to the big farm, and she was egg-bound. And egg-bound, I won't go into the details of it because there's a whole episode on its own, but egg-bound, the egg is essentially stuck inside and can't pass through. Now, it happens usually with age. Sometimes it can happen with different deficiencies for calcium or shell grit and things like that. Sometimes birds are just prone to it. And if they're prone to it, it's actually better to dispatch them and not have them suffer because it can be quite painful. So we had a white bird who became egg-bound. I tried to relieve it myself, and you do that by using olive oil on a gloved hand and trying to go inside the vent and kind of almost it'd be like a midwife opening up the cervix of a human to give birth. And you're essentially trying to ease that egg out with some oil to allow her to pass it. If it doesn't resolve, it doesn't resolve. It's not like it will kill the bird. In this case, I went to do it and the eggshell was obviously not formed enough. It didn't have enough calcium and it broke. Now, once they break, they can cut the inside of their vent area and that can then cause an infection. Once it broke, I knew that there was a chance that she was going to die a horrible death from having an infection internally. We gave her about probably another 4 hours to see if she was going to perk up and come good, maybe be able to fight the infection. She didn't. We dispatched her. I wasn't going to let her suffer. Any kind of contagious disease that's going to impact the whole flock. Now, again, contagious diseases in chickens would be a whole episode, probably about 5 episodes on their own. But if you have a look and you think it's a contagious disease, the best thing you do is, 1, segregate from all your other chickens. Secondly, dispatch the bird before it gets a chance to kind of spread any more of its disease anywhere else. Now, our little marker that we use is, if they're not responding to treatment after 2 or 3 days, then you have to look at culling. And if you can't cull yourself, ask a neighbour if you've got a neighbour nearby who may be able to do it better, and they'll hopefully show you how they do it. Usually dislocating the neck is the easiest way. In the old days we used to refer to it as wringing the neck, but it's a medical term. It's dislocating their neck, and dislocating their neck will stop them from having that brain heart connection and the heart will stop pumping. It's never an easy thing to do. So if you really can't do it, don't beat yourself up about it. If you've got a local vet, then they can usually dispatch a chicken for you, but it's going to cost you. Being able to dislocate their neck is a real skill for life if you're going to be a livestock owner, particularly with chickens. So have a go at doing it. If you're not sure, like I say, ask a neighbour and hopefully they will run you through what their process is. It's a hard thing to describe to somebody else, but it is essentially pulling the body and the head, separating them so that it dislocates their neck. The main thing is, think about the rest of the flock. You want to protect the rest of the flock from anything contagious that might be impacting them. So, natural versus conventional treatments. I've already spoken about the overuse of wormers and how that can impact things because we end up with this resistance to particular medications. So a couple of natural remedies, and like I say, these are more from the perspective of preventative rather than the cure. So these are things you can do to try and prevent you getting to a point where you have to use a conventional treatment. Garlic, apple cider vinegar, and particular herbs like oregano will boost immune health for most chickens. Garlic, even though I'm 100% carnivore at the moment, but garlic is one of those things where once I get my health issues sort of back out again, I will probably add garlic back to my carnivore diet because I actually really like the taste of garlic. But I always find that I do really well when I have a diet that's high in garlic, so I can't imagine the chickens are any different. Apple cider vinegar is a great one for chickens as far as health goes, gut health and everything, but don't overuse it. So I think they recommend sticking it in their water maybe once a week, once a fortnight, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But only a small amount into water. It'd be the same as us trying to drink it straight. It's very corrosive. It can impact their health, so don't overuse it. Natural herbs like oregano and things like that. I think there's a lot of herbs that for a bird like an omnivore, like a chicken, those herbs can be incredibly beneficial from the perspective of a varied diet, but also that they do have some immune boosting properties for animals. Domaceous earth is a fantastic one in diet. The chickens will eat it, but also in mite prevention as far as coating it all over their feathers so it kind of kills the mites and stops them from breeding. Epsom salts, it's good to have on hand. Epsom salts are a great one for an egg-bound bird, but also too if they have foot issues. Epsom salts, like for humans, put your feet in an Epsom salt bath and it will draw some of the impurities and toxins out of your skin. And it's the same for chickens. It can help with their skin, help fixing any kind of bumblefoot or any kind of, if they've had any cuts or anything like that to the bottom of their feet, it can help and it will reduce swelling at the same time. So they're great for preventative or mild cases, but conventional treatments. And again, this is something you need to decide in advance what you're prepared to do and what you're not. So antibiotics can be expensive. and you need to make sure you've got a vet in your area who can prescribe antibiotics in the event that you have decided to go down that route. But for bacterial infections, respiratory infections, cuts that are infected, antibiotics may be the way to go. Mectin is probably the most widely used animal antibiotic, and it's also a human antibiotic. People don't realise, people think people that take ivermectin, they're just taking animal antibiotics. Ivermectin is actually, I think it was developed originally as a human antibiotic, and we've discovered that it works very well for animals. Dewormers, wazine, I can never say it, fenbendazole, the normal worming treatments. Now, you can get wormer that you put in as a liquid into their water supply, or you can get now pellets of wormer. I use the pellets when I've got such a vast number of birds. Unless you can control the amount of liquid that those birds are drinking over, a 24-hour period, the pellets are just so easy to dose. We literally buy a 20-kilo bag, and for the next 2 to 3 days, all of our chickens, all they get is the worming pellets. That's all they get offered. They don't get offered any other laying pellets. And once we do it, we give them about another 24 hours and then we move them to fresh pasture, because our hope is that after 4 days of pooping out all the worms, they've pooped all the worms out in that particular area, we move them to their fresh pasture, they get to their fresh pasture and they're not living in the discarded worm egg casings that are in the ground. So pellets are definitely, we found, have been much more beneficial, and we certainly don't need to worm as often with the pellets as what we used to have to do with the liquid. So I don't know whether that's just that they're getting a better dose or what's happening. Pyrethrin-based sprays for stubborn mite problems. Now the powder is pesterin, and it's, I think, pyrethrin-based. I can never say that word properly. Permethrin. The powder is based on that as well. So it's a really good mite thing, but overcrowding, dirty conditions is what's going to lead to a mite problem, not having them moving around often enough. So, and not being able to dust bath. Chickens will prune and clean their own feathers. So you need to have a dust bath for them that they can do that in. Those kinds of things, though, when you get to that, that's because you've got a more serious pest problem that you're not able to kind of get on top of. So I definitely go with the natural remedies first if you can, and then if they're not working or you find that a bird is still sick, then look at the conventional. But the main things to think about as far as keeping them healthy, so prevention is far, far better than the cure. A clean, dry, well-ventilated coop is going to be your first point of call. Making sure that they have clean water. And you can drop a little bit. What I do with the apple cider that I use, I just drop a little bit in once a week into their water supply. And it's only like half a cup. And I put in, but it's a big container of water that we're talking about. And that just seems to give them a little bit of a boost. Feeding them a balanced diet of layer food. Obviously, layer pellets, we've talked about this before, scratch mixes, chicken candy. Well, it's good as a treat. It's not a good long-term food. You want them to have a varied diet. So you want them to have the layer pellets, but you want them to also be able to be outside pecking at pests and bugs and getting some protein from, field mice, things like that. And having that more varied kind of diet of, pecking at grass and things like that. You don't want them sitting on dirt all the time. I find that people that, when they talk about the commercial laying establishments, they seem to have to worm more often because they're all living in that close confines of the, right next to each other. Calcium for strong eggshells so that you're less likely to have an egg-bound issue. So make sure that they've got the shell grit that they need, the oyster shell and little stones that they need to function properly. And obviously keep an eye on the pecking order. We've talked about pecking order with chickens before. If you've got a particularly aggressive bird, you may look at culling her rather than constantly having to repair other chickens. Sounds terrible, but if they're that aggressive that they're attacking everybody else all the time, it may be something you need to consider. Now, I had down here, I was trying to work out what I knew I had my apple cider vinegar quote things written down. So for those thinking about a gallon of water, which is a couple of litres, 1 tablespoon to a gallon is sufficient for gut health once a week. And that way you're not overdoing it. It's not becoming too corrosive for them. So book is almost finished on raising chickens for egg laying. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going like crazy, but I've also got a million other things on my plate. I take my hat off to working mothers all the time. We balance so many balls in the air, and not just working mothers, working dads too. We balance so many balls in the air, and sometimes you kind of sit down and go, fuck's sake, how do people get everything done? And I'm sure that people don't get everything done. And, other people aren't writing a book, I guess. So, yeah, they probably have more time than I do. But keep an eye out for the book. The Raising Birds for Meat is already out at Amazon. Don't forget, you can go and get that there. It's available for print in Australia, print in all the other countries as well, and also available on Kindle Unlimited. And at the moment, you can still get it on Kindle Unlimited for free if you're a member. So jump on and do that. Now, next week, we're going to be talking about all-weather hens, keeping your hens happy and healthy, whether it is 42 degrees and bakingly hot or minus 20 and snow on the ground. So we'll talk about all that next week, because there are a few things that you have to think about. If you aren't subscribed to Not the Farmer's Wife, jump on and subscribe now. We are coming up to, we alluded to it last week. We're having a name change, and it is coming. I've got a set period. We've got a couple more episodes before it's going to change over, but make sure you're subscribed, because otherwise when the name changes over, you might get a bit confused about what's what. Still going to be same podcast. We're just targeting things a little bit different, which we've already been doing anyway. So make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't left me a review, go and leave me a review on Spotify. It's how our podcast gets heard by other people. And we now have quite a few regular listeners, but there's so many other people out there, I'm sure, that would love to be talking about these kinds of things, about raising chickens for meat and for eggs in their own backyard or on their own small acreage. So definitely review. If you know somebody who you think would get something out of it, then flick it over to them and say, have a listen to this. Anyway, that's it for me this week. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. From all of us at Mojo Homestead, we really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, I ask just one small favour. Please subscribe and leave a review. Reviews help small podcasts like mine be more visible, so more people will know about us and be able to listen in. And don't forget to head over www.mojohomestead.net/launch and check out our freebies. We love helping families start their homesteading journey. Remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.